People assume that being submissive means giving up your power. But what if I told you that for many of us, including myself, it's actually the opposite? This is one of those questions that makes everyone a little uncomfortable, both the feminist crowd and the kink crowd, because it pokes right at the tension between empowerment and surrender. So, today we're diving deep into a question that has shaped my own journey, and honestly, one that I still see debated every single week in this community. And that is, can a submissive still be feminist? And by the end of this episode, you'll see how the two ideas, feminism and submission, that they don't cancel each other out, they actually complete each other. And we'll talk about the biggest misconception people have about submissives, why power exchange doesn't mean powerless, and how the conversation can change depending on your gender. So if you've ever struggled with that inner voice that says, if I enjoy being submissive, am I betraying other women? Or if I give up control, am I giving up equality? Well, then stay with me because the truth might surprise you. Welcome to the Dom Sub Living Podcast. I'm Alessandra, and today we're unpacking something I think a lot of people in our world wrestle with, and that is, how can you be a feminist and submissive at the same time? And I want to say right away, when I say submissive, I'm not just talking about cis women. Submissives can be women, men, and non binary people. Submission isn't gendered, it's about personality and desire and what feels right to you. So, no matter your gender or sexuality, if you identify with the submissive side of the slash, then this conversation is for you. So let's start with a simple question first. What does feminism actually mean? Because there's a lot of debate online about this. But for most of us, feminism is the belief that everyone, regardless of gender, that they deserve equality and autonomy and choice. It's that simple, really. It's not about who's stronger or louder or more dominant. It's about who gets to decide what happens to their own body and their own life and their own pleasure. So, here's my first question I want you to think about. If feminism is about choice, then shouldn't that include the choice to submit? Well, we'll come back to that, but hold it in your mind because what happens for a lot of submissives, especially women, is that feeling of contradiction. Like, I want to be empowered, but I also crave surrender. So, how do those things fit? How do I reconcile that? I remember when I first started exploring BDSM and DS, I had this internal conflict that wouldn't go away. I thought, if I'm a strong and independent and feminist woman, then why do I want to kneel for my partner who's a man? It felt like a betrayal of everything I was taught to be proud of. Everything my mom taught me, she grew up in the 60s and 70s and fought for feminism. But what I learned and what I'll show you in this episode is that the power in submission doesn't come from giving up who you are. It comes from choosing what parts of yourself to offer and who gets to receive them. And that's not weakness, that's power. So let's talk about where this tension comes from then. So, culturally, feminism and submission have been framed as opposites. One is about strength and equality, the other is about obedience and hierarchy, it seems. But that framing only works if you confuse sexual power exchange with social oppression. Feminism fights oppression, but BDSM is built on consent. And those two things aren't exactly the same belief system. I mean, think about it. The feminist movement fought for women to have control over their bodies, their sexuality, their pleasure. And what do submissives do? We make intentional choices about our bodies, sexuality, and pleasure every single day, though. So when you negotiate a dynamic or a scene or set your boundaries and you choose to give someone authority over you, you're establishing ownership. Um, I sometimes use this analogy where feminism just really opened the door and BDSM lets you walk through it on your own terms. But here's a funny story I had happen to me. So, I once had someone message me about me being a BDSM educator and a Dom sub relationship coach. And they said that I was setting women back 50 years. And they meant it as an insult because I was talking openly about kneeling and calling someone sir and serving and embracing power exchange. But here's what I told them. I said, I'm not setting women back. I'm showing what it looks like when women get to choose and decide for themselves what empowerment looks like. And honestly, that's true for submissives of any gender. We live in a country obsessed with control. Everyone's trying to win, to dominate, or outperform. Submission turns that upside down. It's like saying, I don't need to win. I choose depth over dominance. I choose connection over control. I let go. And that is terrifying to people who have built their identity on power over instead of power with. So, why does it scare people so much when someone says, I want to surrender? We'll unpack that later, but first, I want to separate two ideas that always seem to get tangled, and that is feminism as a movement and submission as a orientation. Feminism is political and submission is personal. Feminism fights for rights and submission explores intimacy. One is more about society, the other is more about self. The only clash is if you assume that every submissive is oppressed or every submissive is a woman, and that's simply not true. So let's talk about power because this is where most people get lost. Power exchange doesn't mean you don't have power, it means you're playing with it intentionally. In BDSM, every bit of control is negotiated, every act is built on consent. Every time you say yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, it starts with yes. So when I first started living 24/7 DS, I realized something most people never experience, and that is that structure can create freedom. I don't feel trapped as a submissive. Actually, I finally felt safe because real dominance and submission isn't about domination or subjugation, it's about trust. It's about knowing that the person leading you that they respect your boundaries enough to protect them. It's like a dance. When you watch two people dance, one leads and one follows, but they're both needed. The one following isn't passive, they anticipate, they interpret, and they respond. And when it's done right, it's really beautiful and seamless. It looks like magic. So who has the power in that moment? Is it the one leading or the one who trusts deeply enough to follow with grace? Well, the answer is it's shared. It's dynamic and it's fluid. It's an exchange. And that's what DS is. There's also a misconception that submissives are weak, but I've met some submissives that are some of the most powerful people that could outperform any CEO, and they just command attention without saying a word. And they're able to set boundaries, and they are just so smart and so sharp. I'll tell you later about when the exact moment when I realized that my submission made me stronger, not smaller. But first, I want to touch on something that hits even deeper for a lot of us, and that's shame. If you grew up in a culture that told you to be independent and assertive and self sufficient, then being a submissive can feel like a betrayal of everything you were taught. I know it did for me. I was raised to be the good girl, Straight A student, leadership roles, all of it. I checked every box of what a strong young woman was supposed to look like. And still, behind closed doors, I was craving the exact opposite. I wanted to surrender, to be told what to do, and to let go. I wanted to be guided and claimed and protected. And for a long time, that really terrified me because I thought, what's wrong with me? Like, why do I want something that looks, from the outside abusive, like I'm giving up my power? And I was also a part of a high control religion. So I have that whole mess of purity culture and believing that a man was my head and that I had to be silent. I chose to be in that organization and I thought I was honoring God by being small and hiding behind my husband. So I had that going for me too. So all that shame, that whisper that says you're doing this woman thing wrong, it's something that I think a lot of submissives carry. But here's what changed everything. So I realized that shame was never mine to begin with. I wasn't born shameful. It came from people who didn't understand that choice and freedom can look different for everyone. The moment that broke the spell for me was the first time I experienced true power exchange with someone who really saw me. He didn't take my power or guilt me into giving it to him. He mirrored power back to me. So every command, every ritual, every act of obedience wasn't about diminishing me. It was about amplifying something that was already inside me. Um, Doing a BDSM scene as a submissive that first time was the safest I had ever felt. And when it was done, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. That's when I realized that surrender isn't the opposite of strength. It's how strength manifests itself. We'll come back to that story because what happened afterward completely changed how I see feminism. But first, let me ask you, if submission can heal shame, could it also heal how we view feminism itself? Because when I finally stopped trying to fit submission into other people's definitions of strength, something shifted. I stopped asking, is this submissive enough? And I started asking, is this authentic to me? And that one change really reframed everything because feminism gave me the tools to claim autonomy, but submission gave me the space to use it. So when I kneel, it's not because I'm less than anyone, it's because I've chosen to trust someone with a piece of my power, not because I owe it to them, but because I want to give it to them. And that distinction matters. So many of us grew up hearing that being strong means never needing anyone. But real strength isn't about isolation, it's about the freedom to choose connection. I think of a moment early in my DS journey. We were creating our first protocol together, just something simple, a daily ritual where I kneel before him, each evening and wait for him to tell me that I could come into bed. That first week, honestly, I was really excited and had sub frenzy, of course, but it was also really hard to do. Um, I knew I could finally stop pretending that I was this strong, powerful woman and I could be powerful in a way that felt more right to me. And that's the secret of submission most people miss. Some BDSM educators I know don't like the term power exchange because they feel it means the submissive is giving up their power. but it's an exchange of mutual power between consenting partners. It's a transformation of power. Power isn't removed from the sub, it's reciprocated and given back to them. And that's why I also call it reclaiming, because submission isn't handed out, it's offered. That's why when I kneel, I will put my palms up and rest my hands on the top of my, thighs, because it's an offering. And every time I offer my submission, I reaffirm my right to choose. Because if the patriarchy says a woman's body belongs to others, what's more feminist than choosing who gets to touch it and experience it and when? It's, all on my terms. And again, it's not just women. If society says that men can't be vulnerable, then what's more revolutionary than a male submissive who chooses to surrender with pride? Or if non binary people are told they don't fit the mold, then what's more empowering than defining your own relationship, to, entirely be on your own terms? So maybe the question isn't, can a submissive still be feminist? Maybe it's, what does feminism look like when a submissive defines it? Now, let's talk about what modern feminism gets wrong about kink and how understanding this could change the way people see all of us. Because here's where things get a little tricky. In some corners of feminism, kink is still seen as a little sus. There's this fear that playing with dominance and submission reenacts the very power struggles that feminism, really fought to dismantle. And honestly, I understand that concern. From the outside, it can look very confusing. You see a woman on her knees, or a man tied up, or a non binary submissive obeying commands. And if you don't understand consent dynamics, it looks like oppression. I mean, who was it? Sabrina Carpenter, who, they got huge flack for their album cover where, she was on her hands and knees in front of a man who was pulling her hair. And I think the album was called Man's Best Friend. I thought that was kind of funny, but here's the difference that changes everything. It's the intent and choice. So, oppression takes power without consent, but kink exchanges power with consent. They look similar on the outside, but they're worlds apart. So think of it this way. So feminism fought for women to say no, and BDSM gives everyone the power to say yes, safely and intentionally and without apologizing. But on the other hand, sex negative feminism, it just really misses that nuance. It assumes that any expression that involves hierarchy is just inherently dangerous. But that really ignores agency. And ignoring agency, that's what's truly anti feminist. So when you shame someone for enjoying submission, you're telling them that their way of expressing autonomy is invalid. There's a quote from Audre Lorde I love, and they say, the erotic is a measure between the beginnings of our sense of self and the chaos of our strongest feelings. And that's exactly what BDSM is. It's exploring power, the most charged and intimate and emotional force we have, but you're doing it consciously and compassionately and, yes, consensually. And the irony is, the kink community taught me more about equality and negotiation and consent and respect. It taught me more than any corporate HR workshop I attended, or, college seminar ever did. Because in a DS relationship, or in a dungeon even, no one assumes your boundaries. You have to say them. And no one assumes that your gender means that they know what you want and what your role is. No, you have to communicate it. And that's feminism in practice. And that's why I say that kink doesn't undermine feminism. It's one of the most radical expressions of it. Now, I want to go back to my earlier question. So, why does submission scare people so much? Well, I think it's because it mirrors back everything our culture avoids. So, vulnerability, trust, surrender, emotional exposure. People aren't scared of submission because it's weak. They're scared because it's honest. And honesty is threatening in a world that is built on pretending that we're all in control. When you embrace submission, you're saying that, I'm strong enough to let go. And that is a terrifying but beautiful and feminist thing to say. So, where does all of this leave us? Well, let's come back to the question we started with. Can a submissive still be feminist? Absolutely, because feminism is about freedom, not conformity. And submission, when it's chosen and negotiated and respected, it's one of the purest expressions of freedom there is. I truly believe that. So, feminism taught us to own our voices, but submission teaches us when and how we want to use our voices. Feminism taught us to set boundaries, but submission invites us to explore and play with them with trust. So they're not enemies, they're allies, really. So if you've ever questioned yourself, wondering if you're somehow doing feminism wrong because you like to kneel or obey or surrender or have your partner do those things, I hope this gives you permission to stop apologizing. Your submission isn't a contradiction, it's your truth, and it's written in your own language. If this resonates with you, I have something that goes deeper into this exact topic. It's my free guide called How to Be a Good Sub Cheat Sheet. It's a simple and practical breakdown of how to embody healthy and empowered submission, the kind that honors your needs and your values and your power. So you can grab it for free at domsubliving.com/sub. That link is in the description too. And I'd love to know your thoughts. So, can submission and feminism coexist for you? And how has your identity shaped how you show up in your dynamic? So, let's keep this conversation going because this isn't just theory, it's lived experience for all genders and all identities. So, share your thoughts in the comments or reach out to me on social media. I read every single message. Thanks for watching and for being part of this community and for being brave enough to ask these types of hard questions. And until next time, keep embracing your power and pleasure through Dom Sub Living.